How do you lead? It's just not a formal position where you live in a special house with a parking spot outside and a bunch of security agents. To truly lead, you have to exhibit character. You have to have emotions that bring you into connecting. I can't lead you unless I know what motivates you. So when you don't have those kinds of intellectual curiosities, I don't understand how someone who's in a formal position can call themselves a leader when their followers are not connecting those dots.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Best People podcast. Sometimes the universe conspires to put the perfect person in this chair at the perfect moment. This is one of those weeks. If I Don't Return is not just a book, it's a way to get through the moment in which we're living. A moment in which we're covering a new war in the Middle East, a moment in which we ask every day if our leaders are deserving of the people they're leading, including the ones that voted for them. It's also a moment, though, where everyone should understand what it means when a president sends the country to war, takes the country to war, and sends the men and women of our military into battle. It is an honor to have Lieutenant General Mark Hertling here with your new book, If I Don't Return. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure, and those are very kind words, Nicole. Thank you so much.
I feel like we get to do a version of the Best People concept every time you're on the TV show. So thank you so much for the extended opportunity to talk to you here.
I'm a little bit intimidated. You've had some unbelievable people
That's
on this
ridiculous.
podcast.
Someone asked me what the idea, the concept is behind the Best People, and it's this idea that we're fighting to protect our democracy, and these are the people we're fighting alongside.
Mm,
And I never like to thoughtlessly borrow from fighters who've done real fighting for our country. But does that resonate with you?
it does. It does. But the other thing that I've found interesting about listening and viewing your podcast is how many different kinds of people you have, which is, when you asked me to do it, it's like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool because I hadn't seen another military person on here.
We haven't had one.
So that's just nice the way you're trying to diversify.
I truly believe that the Trump movement is autocratic in nature. And to go study these moments, the democracy side only prevails
Mm,
when it comes from the more diverse sort of swath of society. And so the idea that artists and scholars and actors and politicians and military leaders are all on the pro-democracy side is the piece of it that makes me confident
mm,
democracy will win.
agree. Agree.
Some strategery in there.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, speaking of, the journal is about your deployment, and it starts with a really sobering and sort of gripping concept. Explain.
Yeah, the book transformed from an original journal that I wrote back in 1990 and 1991 when we were notified through Armed Forces Network and CNN on our little house in Germany that our unit was going to war. And it was the first time we knew that was going to happen when the defense director, Cheney, announced that the entire 7th Corps was going to reinforce the 82nd Airborne in Iraq in 1991. So we scrambled around and did all sorts of things the night we were told this. And the next day we put together very quickly and attended an intelligence briefing at our division headquarters, the 1st Armored Division. And in that briefing, the statement was made, here's what we think we're going to do. The cavalry squadron, which I was the operations officer for, is going to be out front of the division by about 20 kilometers, looking for the Republican Guard. That's going to be your mission. So we anticipate your unit taking about 50% casualties. So we're going to
I read that 4
reinforce.
times, and I cannot get my brain around that being
Yeah,
known to you
it was pretty
guys.
much the same at that day when they told us. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. But it made sense at the time because we were going up against Saddam Hussein's army, which was the 4th largest in the world. They had just had an 8-year war against Iran. He had used chemical weapons against the Kurds. So when you do that kind of intelligence assessment, you come up with those kind of figures. And knowing that we were going to be the eyes and ears of the division as the cavalry squadron, for all of us in the squadron, it was like, holy smokes. This is serious stuff. So when you realize you might lose 50% of the people, you got to consider you're going to be one of those. And when I started thinking about having a coin flip chance of coming home with two sons that were 7 and 10 at the time, you know, my mind started racing. You know, my wife's going to potentially be a widow. My two boys are going to be fatherless. So what can I do to help them if I don't come home? That generated the idea of keeping a journal, which, you know, a lot of soldiers do that. But what I wanted to do was not what I was doing every day, although some of that comes through, but it was teaching them lessons about adulthood, manhood, how they're going to grow up. So every day I picked a different subject, wrote something about it. Some were sublime and some were ridiculous. Then the war started. After we were finished, the 4-day campaign, I wrote more about what we experienced during the war. But then there was that long period after, too, where we were still in Iraq, post-conflict, and a lot of things were happening there, which were the gruesome after effects of combat. We came upon mass graves and torture chambers and all sorts of things that had happened with Saddam's army. Okay, so that's how the original journal came about. I came home, of course, they were still, at that time, 8 and 11 when I arrived back home, and they didn't want to talk about the deep reflections of their old man. So the journal went into a Foot Locker, and it was a couple of years ago that our youngest son pulled it out, asked my wife where it was, he pulled it out, and unbeknownst to me, he typed it up in a Word document and inserted pictures. And then Christmas morning of 2024, when we had all the grandkids in our house, they opened all their presents. They went off to start playing with all their toys, and it was just our youngest son and me, and he came up to me with this box. And he said, "Dad, this one's just for you." When I opened it up and started, I'm getting emotional, but when I opened it up and saw the journal, first of all, the gift of love that he had given us, he and his brother, and then started thumbing through it, and all the sights and sounds and smells of the desert came back, as they do to veterans. He then said, after he let me thumb through it for a minute, he goes, "Dad," he said, "my brother and I understood what you were doing here." He said, "You were preparing us in case you didn't come home." I said, "That's right." And he's a combat veteran, so is his brother. And he said, "Well, now you've got to give this gift to somebody else and write what happened in the rest of your life to the grandchildren." And he said, "You've been to 3 more deployments. You've done all sorts of things in the Army. You've gone from being a major to a 3-star general. You've now had a private life in healthcare and in media and in journalism and teaching." He said, "Write about all those things so the grandsons know who you are once you're gone." I don't think he thought I was going to do it, truthfully, but I dove into it, and my wife Sue just loved watching me work on it, because I would come out of my small office, and there would be days when, I was floored with what I had written in terms of the emotional response to the original journal entry, but it was also extremely cathartic. And there were many times she walked in the office and caught me literally bawling. I mean, not just tears, but reactions to things, looking back. And what I gained from it, Nicole, was the fact that we don't do as much reflection on our life as we should. So as an old guy now, it was a great time to reflect and dwell on good things, but also a lot of mistakes that I made. It's a leadership book, but it's more about the world around you and how to be an evolving leader and figure out how to influence other people and do the right things and use your values and your character to get good things happening in the world.
I also think it's about how you lead with the truth. Like the thing, I read the part about the 50% casualties 6 times and read it out loud to everyone in I said, how do you, that's crazy. And then I read the part about you writing about something that wasn't true.
Mm,
But you are the one that's telling on yourself for
mm,
not writing the truth in your first version.
yeah. this was a post-war event, and it's kind of the spoiler in the book. I've had a couple people read the book for edits to see if I got it right, and one of the guys who was there with us, he was an aviator, a good friend of mine, Tupper Hillard. He immediately called me when he got to that chapter, and he goes, "Are you shitting me? Did this really happen?" I said, "Yeah, it did, and nobody knows about it except for Sue, my wife." And I didn't tell her until a couple of years later. But what had happened is, after the war, we were given a swath of land that we had to clear, which meant we had to go into bunkers and, facilities that had ammunition and stuff like this. So we were
Can you
going.
just describe that? I mean, you talked about reliving the sights and sounds. Like, what is that?
Oh
What
my
is that day
gosh.
like? Just can you take us through that
Yeah,
a day
that
like
day, I
that?
mean, we were still riding around, and my crew we were still riding around in our Bradleys. We were with other people spread out over a very big area. I mean, it wasn't like the war where we were close together. And there were underground bunkers, dugouts. I couldn't even call them bunkers because they weren't reinforced with bricks or wood or anything like that. They were just dug out in the middle of this completely flat as this tabletop desert. And they had a little bit of shelter over the top, but not much that would prevent any kind of artillery round from being thwarted. And it was starting to get hot. I mean, it was probably 100 degrees, I guess, and we were in our gear and just driving around, and we would see a bunch of bunkers. So we just go into them and make sure that there was nothing left inside. Well, there was no one there, or so we thought. And we had probably gone into a dozen or 20 of them before I went in all by myself. My other 3 crew members for the Bradley were off, each taking a different one. Truthfully, we got a little complacent. And when I walked in, there was a guy inside. And as soon as I came down the side of the bunker to the inside, I was going from bright sunlight into the dark. And when you would go from sunlight into dark, your eyes adjust. So in this one, this guy stood up with his rifle and was getting ready to bring it up to shoot. And I had my pistol drawn, and I fired first. When the original journal, I didn't tell that. But in the reflections on that journal entry, I came clean and said that I killed the guy. And what happened next was his helmet fell off as he dropped to the ground. And inside of his helmet, like a lot of soldiers have, he had a picture of his family. In fact, I had the same picture, same kind of picture in my helmet. And we had been in multiple fights up to that point during the war, but they were all at long range. Bradley can kill an enemy vehicle at 1,500 to 2,500 meters. So we were shooting a lot, but never close in. So this was a shock to the system. It would create a moral injury that stayed with me for a long time, and it changed me. When I came home, I don't think it was post-traumatic stress disorder, but it was certainly post-traumatic stress. And the recurring dream of this event continued for a very long time. And finally, one day, my wife said, "We need to get some help." So she talked me into going to see somebody. And this was before 9/11. So for a major at the time, going to see a shrink was probably not a good idea, but I did it on the outside world, and it was very helpful. But I grew up a Catholic, and reading St. Augustine and the morals of war and those kind of things just didn't quite fit in with the faith. So was that particular entry.
You think about how many young veterans struggled after their tours and after
Well, on that account, I mean, we were in tanks and Bradleys and helicopters. The last 2 deployments I had, we had young men and women, knocking down doors up, as one guy once told me, coffee breath close to their enemies all the time, shooting at close range, going into dangerous things every single day. And that's what I saw in my next couple of tours, which is when you talk about moral injuries to people you ask to do something that doesn't fit in with the human psyche. it's a whole lot harder than it appears to people who have not experienced that.
And there's nothing about combat that a civilian population can understand. Like you can support, but you don't understand that if you've not been there. It seems that those subsequent deployments might make veterans feel even more detached from their family and from their communities. And you said we don't do a good job reflecting. It feels like we didn't even do a good job sort of explaining that
No.
that's what they'd been through.
Well, you can't. I mean, it just like most people don't understand, it's very hard to explain. I hope that comes out a little bit in the book, an explanation of some of the things our soldiers go through. Because truthfully, I was a young, dumb kid from Missouri when I went off to the military academy. And I didn't know what I was getting into, just going to West Point in 1971 when the Vietnam War was still raging. But you learn the things that you have to do, and you're steeled toward action, and you're given experiences that help prepare you. But it's like taking a basketball team that's only been practicing and suddenly putting them up against the Chicago Bulls or the Orlando Magic and saying, do your best. And oh, by the way, it's not just a game now. Life and death depends on it. How do you prepare for that? You don't.
I mean, people self-select for that life. What is it about the people who opt in to fight and potentially die for their country?
Yeah, it's interesting because that would be my question whenever I went on patrols with soldiers when I was a division commander. When I'd go out to do something called battlefield circulation, which meant just going out and walking around on patrols with guys, I'd be the two-star general showing up and, asking a lieutenant, can I go with you? And I'd take my rank off and walk around with his platoon or his squad. And when it was all over, after watching them to get a feel for what was going on in their area, when we'd be going back toward the forward operating base, I'd ask the question, so what caused you to join the Army? And the amount of answers that were different that I got were just incredible. So there's no one reason.
What are some of the answers?
Well, my grandfather told me I should do it. I was in trouble at school and I didn't want to go on to college, those kind of things. One kid who was a Harvard graduate, interestingly enough, the son of a very famous author, Joe, said, I joined the Army because I was working on Wall Street during 9/11 and realized I had to do something. And when he got into the Army, he I asked him how his mom and dad felt about that because both of them were professors at Harvard. And he said they weren't real happy about that, but they said they were proud of him. So that's one. I have a funny story about a kid that I was riding back and asked a truckload of guys why they joined the Army, and everybody started laughing. And I had never had that reaction before. And the driver, who was a sergeant, I was in the shotgun seat of an MRAP, armored vehicle. The sergeant said, hey, sir, you got to ask Private Green, why he joined the Army. I said, okay. I looked around the back of the truck and I said, okay, which one of you guys is green? And they're all still laughing. And this hand comes down, and you got to understand an MRAP. So you've got the driver and the guy in the shotgun seat. You've got a guy standing between you, and he's outside on the machine gun, protecting the vehicle. And this hand comes down next to my head, and he said, hey, sir, I'm green. I'm up here at the gun. He said, they're wanting me to tell you what I did before I joined the Army. I said, okay, green, what'd you do? Sir, I was a male model. Everybody cracks up again. And, I'm just listening to this, and I can't see him, so I don't know. We pull into the fob. He jumps off the truck. He takes his helmet off, his goggles. He had goggles on. His face is caked with dust. Green is one good-looking kid. And I said, well, Green, okay, tell me why. I said, you didn't tell me why you joined. You just told me what you did. And he goes, well, he said, I was 19 years old. I was making a lot of money as a model, but I looked in the mirror one day after an all-night drunk, and he said, I said to myself, I need to do something more important with my life. And he walked into a recruiting station and signed up. I'm getting emotional thinking about that kid. And so I'm starting to get emotional. I said, okay, I can't cry in front of a group of my soldiers. They'll think I'm a real wuss. And so I said, okay, Green, that's great, but you're running a gun truck in northern Iraq right now. How are you feeling about that decision? And then he came back with something that just floored me. He said, "Pretty damn good, sir." He said, "I'm with my brothers now." He said, "I didn't have much of a family." He says, "But all these guys are my brothers." He says, "I've got a new set of values." He recited the Army values. And he says, "I'm feeling pretty good about it. This is a good life." He said, "I wasn't doing anything for society when I was a model." So you ask why kids join the Army? Keep asking, because sometimes you get some really weird, weird responses.
What's it like? I mean, your face changes when you talk about them. What's it like when you lose one of them?
Um, I lost too many, and the great majority of them were ones I had never met. There was one kid, a 21-year-old lieutenant, who I knew very well because I'd had dinner with him before the war. He was a West Point classmate of our youngest son, the one that typed up the journal.
Yeah.
And
I'll call him and blame him for making me cry when
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
over.
and they were doing a history class at Gettysburg, and we were in Virginia. I was stationed at the Pentagon at the time. And so Scott, our son, said, "Hey, why don't you come on up and do the staff ride to Gettysburg with us?" So my wife and I drove up. And after the day was over, of course, what they really wanted me to do was buy them all dinner, so which I did. And I met this kid, and I later found he was assigned at a division, and he was killed in 2004 during the Sadr uprising. What's it like? It's devastating if you don't know him. It's something that will put you under the table if you really know him. And there's so many of them. There are so many of them, and they're all so young. So yeah. And by the way, it's been 20 years. Well, it's been 15 years since I got out of the Army. I still think about him every day.
Every day?
Every day.
When you watch our politics, and I guess if you've watched closely, as we both have over the last 10 years, General Kelly came to the Trump administration with a story like that. His own son
Yeah.
died in Afghanistan.
And
And
by the way, I can't imagine that.
why?
That's just a whole nother level when you lose. I mean, I don't know how John did that. And John and I were together in Iraq during my last tour. I was in the north, he was in the west, and we did a lot of work together. And it was before his son was killed. And I can't imagine the pain his family. I went to his son's funeral, and I think I was the only Army guy there with a bunch of Marines, which is a scary experience in and of itself. But it was just, it's just unfathomable to bury your own child because of a war, especially.
Well, and then to decide to keep serving the country that took your son. I mean, I guess to cover politics and to cover General Kelly's time as chief of staff to Donald Trump, and to learn about the things Donald Trump said at Arlington, no less, about not understanding why someone would do it, and to have a view of the men and women who served that's anything less than being grateful and floored and in awe, and not being able to understand that piece that makes them want to protect you, people they've never met. To be so far on the other side of that as to disrespect it and believe they're, quote, losers and suckers, and to denigrate the sacrifice. What is that? I feel like that's another piece we don't reflect on enough. What does that mean to have that person back as the commander in chief?
There's a sadness to someone who can't understand it. And if you're running for office, in my view, and I would never do it, by the way, it's more than just the problems of the nation. It's understanding the people you lead and reflecting in what our Constitution says. So I can't speak for John Kelly and what he thought when his boss would say something like that, but I think I know what I would say. The first thing I would say is, boy, that's really sad that you don't get it. that you don't understand why people think that what we're defending is so great. The things that we're pledging our potentially giving our life for is so important that you would brush it off like that. And then the second thing I'd probably do is leave. I can't work for this guy. And I've done that with jobs in the private sector since I've retired. I have left because the ideas and the values of the organization didn't fit into mine. That whole Constitution thing, people kind of gloss over that where you're taking an oath to something. And the other thing I did as commander of U.S. Army Europe, when I'd go to the 49 different countries in Europe on visits, and I'd be engaging with their armies, I would always ask soldiers to say, what do you take an oath for? Just to see what they, and, you'd get the responses of, I took to the motherland, to the fatherland, to the king, to the queen. The Israeli army puts themselves between the people and the sea. But there are very few countries that pledge their life to a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. That's a reflection of ideas and values and what we believe. And now sometimes we can't even get people to say what those beliefs are. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of people say, "Oh, we're for the America's values." Oh yeah, name me a couple, mm-hmm. and tell me how you're for them. Because it's not just what's in that paper; it's what people have spoken of. FDR, Four Freedoms, Gettysburg Address, us being one people, mm-hmm. Kennedy's inauguration, mm-hmm. Martin Luther King's I Have. I mean, these are beautiful works mm-hmm. of people expressing ideas.
Mm-hmm. Consistent with the Constitution.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
Different than defending a motherland or a king, that's for sure.
Well, that's been brought into sharp focus this year, this first year of Trump's second term. The First Amendment has not been under assault like this in our history. Back to General Kelly, who I've now covered for 9 years. He finally gives a recorded interview before the election to warn about Trump's autocratic visions. What does that mean for the military to have someone who is constitutionally atop our government, atop the executive branch, is also the commander-in-chief, but is now flagrantly, according to his most senior generals, General Kelly, General Mattis, and General Milley, autocratic to his core?
Yeah. Well, what's cool about the military is through an entire career, you're rebuffed, you're polished at every rank. You go to schools, you're with like-minded people, and don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect organization. There are some real faults within the military, but at every level, you go back to a schoolhouse, and you re-green in the Army, re-blue in the Navy, and you think about what is it we're doing, and part of it is the mechanics, the science of your job, mm-hmm. but part of it is the art of understanding why you're doing it. And I think to answer your question, politicians don't go to those schools. They're not forced to think about it. And in fact, they're brought up in a world where opinion matters a whole lot more than facts and logic. And that's unfortunate.
What does it mean for this war that we're entered in now?
In Iran, in this particular one, there's a lot of swagger and a lot of bluffs, and sometimes I'll say hyperbole is a nice word to deflect from using lies, to win the support of people. I don't like any one of those three things. It goes against the value of integrity and truth-telling, but it's used as a marketing tool. What does it mean for this conflict that we're finding ourselves in today? It's a marketer who has sold a bad product and isn't given a guarantee behind it, like most businesses do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a former businessman, but he's failed at all of his businesses because of this same kind of thing. When you don't plan an operation, when you don't give it the depth of analysis that it needs to have, and you're asking people to potentially put their life on the line to do it, to me, that's just, I don't know a word for it, but it's dangerous.
8 people at the time of this recording have lost their lives, and I think around 140 have been injured. Um, you write about, I mean, the whole journal is about going off to war and leaving something for your kids and your wife in case you don't come home. Those 8 service members will never come home. We're
Right.
just starting to learn about their lives. What are those families going through right now? Those 8 families.
Well, I'll carry it forward a little bit if I can and say there's those 8, and then there's another 140 or so who have been injured, and we don't know the extent of their injuries
Or how?
or how or where.
Or why?
Yeah, yeah, that's the biggest question.
Is that normal?
No. I mean, as a commander of forces on the ground, I want to tell my women and men, here's what we're doing and why we're doing it, because that's part of influence. That's part of leadership. You have to know the why of what you're doing in a democratic army. So you have the 8 who have sacrificed their life after raising their hand to that oath. And then you've got 140 who, some of them may be minor wounds like I had. Some of them may have lost a leg or, God knows what. And we just don't even know them yet. So going back to your previous question, if there's a politician who's safe in a lit, air-conditioned room making decisions without understanding the depth of those decisions, shame on them. I mean, you work for a president that wrestled with those decisions.
Yeah, and I don't want to gloss over how unpopular his decisions about Iraq and Afghanistan became. I guess what I would say, what I witnessed, was deep, deep pain at any pain his decisions caused anyone, and a bottomless well of reverence for the men and women of the military and their mamas and their wives and their kids. And I hope it's a state secret that Donald Trump feels those things. I really,
I
I
hope so, too.
pray. I pray. I
Yeah.
pray he feels those things. I pray he is a version of himself with the families that we never see.
Yeah.
I pray that's true.
Well, when he said in France at Belleau Wood, that is, I mean, that's, if you know the fight that occurred at Belleau Wood, it compares to some of the things the Ukrainians are going through today. In fact, it's probably a little bit worse. And to say you didn't want to go there and to stand among those crosses and stars of David and just reflect on that, it gets back to my statement, we don't reflect enough. Maybe you don't understand why they did it, but try and learn. Try and convince yourself that you might understand why young 18-year-olds will put themselves in a trench and continue to attack the enemy to stand for what they believe in as opposed to just hand waving it.
What do you think about the promise to never take the country to war in the Middle East again? That was a consistent promise. And, I was in the Republican Party that where the base had grown so dissatisfied with its leaders that's how they land on Trump in 2016. Perhaps mostly because of that promise and the wounds and the discontent with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now we are at a war for which there's no stated objective. There's no publicly articulated benchmarks for success. We've been keeping track. There are about 9 rationales that have
Right.
been offered. We followed Israel. They've walked away from we were going to be attacked. What do you think it means in terms of a publicly stated promise and then a reversal on that
Well,
promise?
and you're talking about a publicly stated promise that has to do with life and death and spending our nation's treasure and sending people to war with their families back here worried about them. I mean, that's a pretty big promise to break. And all I was thinking as you were talking about that was Bush 1. He said one thing, no new taxes.
Read my lips.
Yeah, read my lips.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
And that caused him not to be elected.
Bush one is such
Allegedly.
a good example, though, because he also, if you remember, one of the other campaign faux pas is the scanner at the grocery store. I mean, Donald Trump, like literally, Stephanie Rule put it perfectly, lives in a gilded bubble. You know, the idea that you could be voted out or not be successful for not knowing how a scanner works, like no one thinks Donald Trump does anything normal.
Mhm.
What does that say about our politics?
It is the connection with people. And by the way, it's also says a lot about leadership.
Mhm.
How do you lead? It's just not a formal position where you live in a special house with a parking spot outside and a bunch of security agents. You know, to truly lead, you have to exhibit character. You have to show your presence. You have to understand what you're doing, have a competencies. I mean, that's what corporations look for.
Right.
You have to develop other people. You have to have emotions that bring you into connecting so you can influence and understands what motivates Nicole Wallace before I can't lead you unless I know what motivates you. So when you don't have those kinds of intellectual curiosities, I don't understand how someone who's in a formal position can call themselves a leader when their followers are not connecting those dots.
When you saw the politics on the right play that out when they condemned General Milley for wanting to understand white rage, they lost their freaking
Yeah.
minds.
Yeah.
When he said, I just wanted to understand it after the insurrection.
We read Marx so we can understand what our enemy's doing.
Yeah. I mean, I used to watch and read every Democratic campaign book so that I understood Democratic campaigns because I was working on Republican campaigns. But by their theory, if you're curious about another perspective, you're what, woke? Is the military woke?
I am purposely because I want to know about other people when I'm working with them. I think you gain a whole lot of strength from that. Not only just your friends, but also your enemies. You better know what your enemies are thinking. Football coaches do that. They always scout out the other team.
Game tape, yeah.
I mean, you know, it'd be like telling, I don't know, Tommy Tuberville not to have game tapes from, you know, Auburn when he's coaching at Alabama. It's ridiculous.
We go to a lot of baseball games, and sometimes we sit near the scouts for the other teams and explain to my son, like, they're here because they're going to play them next.
Right.
And that's part of understanding, you know, how to be your best. But what about all the smears against the military for being too diverse or too progressive? I mean, I spent a lot of time on military bases when I worked in politics, and I did not detect a crisis of wokeness anywhere. And if you're the largest workforce in the country, it seems that you want to be excellent for everybody.
Well, teaching at a business school now, which is what I do, I can cite probably no less than 1,000 studies on diversity and how it contributes to a better workplace.
Yeah.
It contributes to better teamwork. And in fact, I've had conversations with with colleagues who are former generals and admirals, and you know the discouraging part of that is we attempted for years to actually drive that diversity.
Yeah.
So we could really
To nurture
represent
it.
I mean, you know, it's fascinating. We have soldiers from every state in the Union and all the territories.
Yeah.
So they are I mean, a kid from New York is a whole lot different than a kid from Mississippi.
Right.
And you form some pretty good teams that way too.
We haven't talked about Pete Hegseth yet. I don't even know what I want to know about Pete Hegseth. I guess, how did Pete Hegseth happen?
Well, he wasn't in the Boy Scouts, that's for sure, because he's condemned the Boy Scouts now.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, the character of a leader, if you go into research, will tell you it's formed by background, what you talk about around the dinner table with your parents, what you learn at church, what you learn in your schools, culture, where you come from, and your values. I'd kind of like to ask Pete Hegseth what his values are. You know, what does he see important? And how do those things drive his decision making? Because that's what values do. Because if you don't have any values, you're going to be a windsock. You're going to flow back and forth. Unless you believe in humility or integrity or some of the values that are associated with being a good leader, you're not going to be a good leader for everyone.
Yeah. I'll just go by what's been publicly reported about him. You know, his Fox Weekend News colleagues describing him as smelling like alcohol. Monterey, California Police Department investigating an alleged rape. The reported stories about his, past marriages, and the reporting around him. I think he said on an interview with Megyn Kelly that he would promise not to take a sip.
My plan going forward, ongoing, is when I deployed, we had something called General Order Number 1. It is, you are not allowed to drink while you're on deployment, right? So if you're in Iraq and Afghanistan in a combat zone, you're not allowed to drink. That's how I view this role as Secretary of Defense, is that I'm not going to have a drink at all. And it's not hard for me because it's not a problem for me. So this is the biggest deployment of my life, and there won't be a drop of alcohol on my lips while I'm doing it.
Clearly talking about a pledge that in the way he talked about it sounded like it would be hard for him, but because of the job, he promised he wouldn't drink. Could a rank and file member of the military have those things going on?
Absolutely not. I mean, because they couldn't get a clearance. I mean, when you have a DUI or a felony arrest or even an accusation, your clearance is pulled. So you can't do anything until it's reestablished. The thing that I have problems with is when you put somebody like that up for a position as important as the defense secretary, which is probably the hardest job in government, other than maybe state, and you vote for him, those are the people I have trouble with.
I think about it now as the midterms near. I mean, one of the stories that we covered in 2020 was that someone had the harebrained idea of having the military seize voting machines. Esper was the Secretary of Defense, and Mark Milley was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And I mean, the multiple books and accounts have come out about those two refusing to do those sorts of things. Do you think that a request to seize voting machines would be carried out this time?
I don't know. It's a great question that I don't have an answer to. But when you talk about those who didn't carry it out the last time, you don't have to like any of those people, but they evidently live by a set of values. I know Milley did. He's an Army guy. He lives by loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. So he had the personal courage to say no. He had the responsibility of duty to say this isn't right. He was loyal to the Constitution. So I mean, I could go down the list of the 7 Army values, which Mark Milley knows, and say, oh, okay, that's why he did it or didn't do it. Esper was a soldier too. So he probably had those same values and say, we can't, this isn't right. We swore an oath.
And Trump ended up at odds with both of them. What does that say about
funny
Trump?
thing about that.
What does that say about Trump?
It goes back to values. Do you have them or do you not? Or, I mean, everybody has values. It's just, what are they? Greed is good in a movie one time, I think. That is a value. Greed is good. From an old movie called Wall Street.
Exactly. And that seems to be laid over into our politics now. What is your degree of worry about the next 8 months and the next 3 years?
I'm concerned about our institutions across the board, whether they hold or not. There are indicators, in my view, that they are holding. Some are bending more than others, but I haven't seen any that have broken yet. And that's a good thing.
Well, I think the Republican Party broke.
Yeah, but even they're appearing to come back a little
Massey
bit.
and Tillis.
And that's the interesting thing, because the Republican Democratic Party are both needed.
Correct.
But they need to be functioning.
I mean, they won't do what they're supposed to do.
Right.
I mean, Congress is supposed to make decisions about tariffs. Congress is supposed to make decisions about war, and they're not doing either of those things. So I would argue that the Republican Party is broken and the Republican-controlled Congress is badly damaged.
But you know what? I'm an eternal optimist. And I believe, and I've said this to my wife a couple of times, we won't be back to what we were, but there's a huge possibility that we could come back better.
How?
Because perhaps we lose the swagger and gain a little bit of humility, and as a nation understand what we have done and not try and overlook it, and maybe find ways that we can rebuild trust between each other and start having these kinds of conversations, even though if you feel differently about a subject.
We haven't talked about your wife yet, but you write about, I think one of the journal entries is trying to explain to your sons why you keep, hugging them and touching their hair, and why you want to do the same, to your wife. This feeling of how much you love something when you think you might lose it. That's
Yeah.
this patriotism that I think a lot of people in this fight to save democracy
That's a
feel.
great point. Yeah, when you think you might lose it. And we have had indicators that we might lose it. We better start believing those indicators because we might, unless we get our act together.
Are you sympathetic to the argument that people want to hear from more of the military leaders who work for Trump, who saw him in the room, people like Mattis and Milley and Kelly?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to it, but I also understand why they're not.
Why aren't they?
Because I'm really on a razor's edge, truthfully, and I get a lot of grief from both sides.
For speaking out.
Yeah. Just because you hold the title of general, a retired general or whatever, people think you're trying to influence them in your direction. And I don't try and do that. I've kind of toned myself down a little bit, I think. And I'm just stating the facts, the obvious, using the Aristotelian approach of logic, reason, and passion, and maybe not as much passion as some of the other two things.
Why'd you tone yourself down?
Because I was getting too mad and showing too much emotions.
What made you mad?
What was happening? I mean, how can you not get mad at seeing some of the things we saw and using the military in the wrong words and having a bunch of soldiers standing behind you that you hand choose and start cheering and the leadership didn't stop it? That pissed me off. I'll say that right now, because that's a leadership issue. That's not a soldier issue. There's going to be soldiers in our military who are supporters of Donald Trump. Okay, fine. But we specifically tell them you're apolitical if you're wearing the uniform. So take it off or don't stand behind the guy. And that's for both presidents, both parties as well. Going back to your question, though, when you're a leader of soldiers, when you're a commander, when you have the rank, you have to appeal to both sides. And if I'm an active duty commander and I start knocking Trump, there's people in my unit that are Trump supporters. So they're going to say, boss doesn't care about my feelings.
Or my safety.
So it follows down the road. It's the same way as having chaplains who speak in the military about one religion.
Right.
Because every formation has Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and all sorts of, and atheists. The other thing I'll say on the issue of generals speaking out is I think there's a vast number of Americans who think the generals are going to save us. And they're not. I mean, we take that oath to the Constitution. If you elect a guy that I don't like as the president, I'm still going to support him.
But let me just play the devil's advocate.
Sure.
I mean, I think that what people hoped, and look, in the end, General Kelly did do an interview, and in the end, Bob Woodward reported on Secretary Mattis and General Milley's views, and General Milley testified. But I think that it is hard for people to understand how different this is. I worked for a president whose policies became very unpopular. No one ever felt like he was threatening to end democracy. They didn't like the things he did. On the other side, there were people that didn't support some of former President Obama's policies, but no one thought that President Obama was going to end the experiment, the American experiment in democracy. And I think there are people that believe this is a break glass moment, and no one knows better than the generals what that oath to the Constitution means and the unique danger that Donald Trump as commander-in-chief represents.
And I can understand that. I understand people thinking that way. But if you think that way about this particular president, then I would say you might want to think that same way about President Obama for the people that don't like him, or President Bush for the people that didn't like him.
Isn't what Trump's doing more dangerous than anything Bush or Obama did?
I do. Logically, I believe it is very dangerous. It's threatening what that document means. And that's why I speak out. Because even as a retired guy, I still believe that I support and defend the Constitution. So when I see violations of what I believe are constitutional issues, I talk about it. going to war without the support of the American public and the Congress of the United States and violating rules that courts lay down, yeah, that starts getting into dangerous territory.
What is the role now of the military now that we're at war in Iran? And Pete Hegseth, standing next at CENTCOM, talked about how we'd only just begun. Donald Trump on timeline has been kind of all over the place. It's almost complete and it could go on a long time. So I don't know what kind of source he is on escalation, but what would the military be prepared for in terms of what direction the policymakers were?
It's the same thing they always should be prepared for: not obeying unlawful orders, period. Will there be some that violate that? I hope not.
Have there already in the Caribbean?
I don't know. I don't know the details. Truthfully, to me, it still looks flaky. What happened in the Caribbean looks flaky on what we're doing right now in Iran. But I don't know the background to it and the more detailed discussions.
It seems that Trump is not particularly tethered to what he's hearing in a PDB or an NSC process. Marco Rubio has made clear that Israel's foreign policy drove our timing, at least, in terms of deploying the U.S. military to Iran. I mean, is there a point where the rubber could meet the road here?
No, absolutely. I don't know what that point is, but absolutely. Bombing civilian neighborhoods. I mean, I don't know what the target list is, but if any military planner is given an order to do something specifically like that without an understanding of the legal implications of a war crime, then yeah, I think so.
We are at war with Iran without the JAG officers that were there before Trump was inaugurated last January. How much more difficult does that make this?
Hugely difficult.
How?
This will be hard for your civilian listeners to understand. But I got to tell you, as a senior commander from brigade level up, brigade being an organization of about 7,000 or 8,000 soldiers, I had a legal advisor. And in fact, it was so important to me in Iraq, my legal advisor became my aide de camp and was with me all the time. He would provide me advice on an hourly versus a daily basis. Now, Secretary Hegseth would say, see, Hertling's woke, he's dependent on the legal versus the lethal.
We're going to unleash the.
But perhaps that shooting of a guy in a bunker told me the difference between legal and lethal and the repercussions of moral injury on something. That's not to say I'm afraid. I'll fight people. I killed people at long range. But when you kill them up close and personal, that makes all the difference in the world.
What is your hope for the book?
Couple things. The reason I decided to get it published was because I was influenced by someone who said that 99% of Americans don't understand what the military does because only 1% wear the uniform, less than 1% actually. So it's hopefully a tool to help people understand not necessarily only what soldiers do, but what military families do, because we have become a secluded society with the military. Military lives on their post. Everybody else is on the outside world. The second thing is to really talk about leadership and character and decision making in crises, because in war by definition is a crisis. It's chaos. It's dysfunction. And a commander's role is to control that. But crises occur in every single organization, some big, some small. I mean, I was with the healthcare system when COVID hit and watched how doctors and nurses reacted to that. And it was a whole lot the same as what soldiers do in combat. So if this book helps people to understand, going back to the question about values, that your values help you get through crises and help you make decision-making in the right way, then that would be valuable. And then the third thing was the evolution of war in the short time that I lived. I mean, I spent 38 years in the active army, and in the three different wars, the three different deployments, the first one was a conventional fight with a lot of armor and tanks and all that kind of stuff. The second one was a complex counterinsurgency, which is a different kind of war. The third one was a complex counterterrorism fight. and nation building in Iraq because it was required after we broke it. The kinds of wars we're facing today, snatch and grabs, shooting gunboats, invading a country along with one ally and no other allies helping us, those are all different too. So in each one of those, there's a requirement for another analysis of what we're getting into. And hopefully people will see some of the complexities of combat.
What is one thing that people who are not in the military always get wrong about military families or military life?
There's an ever-present assessment that we're all like the Great Santini. that we're all disciplined monsters and we order people around and stuff like that. You don't get 18 and 19-year-old men and women to do the kinds of things we ask them to do with just orders. You have to understand their motivations. You have to influence them in the right way, and you have to provide an example. At least that's today's military. It is a profession. That's another thing about it that I don't think most people understand. The profession of arms, with all the professional requirements of knowledge, ethos, and values, disciplining those who violate the profession, doing something that no one else can do, which is what journalists do. And again, I go back to being a poor kid from St. Louis, Missouri, who had a chance to join the Army. I got in my first year at West Point and said, what the hell have I gotten myself into? And since then, by last count, I've been to 123 different countries. And I've seen the value of different cultures. I've had dinners with privates and presidents and kings. And I think I've had that great opportunity to see the world, and it's a pretty cool place.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for having this conversation.
This was such incredible fun. Getting to talk to a superhero like you is really kind of cool. Thank you.
So awesome.
Thanks for
Thank you
asking
so
me.
much. Thank you.
Yep.